larger, more complex supply chains. Most people know me through my affiliation with Kitchen Table Advisors, which is my primary client. And I'm sort of a one-person program for them, and built out sort of their market access and value chain programming. So Kitchen Table Advisors, if you're not familiar with them, their core program is providing free 3-year business advising to small and mid-sized farms and ranches around Northern California. There's about 129 of those active and alum clients that receive support from KTA. And my main role is to build connections for them. And so I do that with a 3-pronged strategy. Basically, there's coach and support, which is quick and tactical matchmaking, introductions to retailers, restaurants, and any other type of buyer. And then there's the middle prong, which is innovate, which is where we get larger buyers, particularly food service buyers, to experiment with us and do pilots with us. And that's kind of where my pilot with Renee and Co come in. And so we're having buyers share some power with growers, experiment with us, et cetera. And then the third prong is called organize, or what I like to call seize the means of distribution. How can we get farmers to get more power in the supply chain, more say over aggregation and distribution? And so there's some long-term efforts going on around there. Most of the farmers that I work with tend to be Mexican or indigenous in the Salinas and Watsonville areas, just a couple hours south of where I live. And I spend a lot of time down in that region. And yeah, so that's a little bit about me, kind of the high level. And this pilot in particular, I'm really excited to talk with you all about, just because it's really just, like getting into a tech company carries a lot of weight in the larger community, and especially in a food service environment. I was speaking in the breakout group about how food service is a really difficult space to kind of get small farmers into. And also it just has so much potential. We've all seen pilots like this stall and run into a lot of difficulties in our various regions. And I just see so much potential in it because of the purchasing power, the power of menuing, and also just the emergence of food service champions and sustainability champions like Renee and her team within Sodexo and within the particular subsidiary that we work with, Good Eating Company. So having people committed and making sure that it can get through all the different hurdles and moving into like really institutionalizing and creating a sense of permanence around these programs, for me, just really excites me. And we're kind of like, we have our machete in the forest and we're blazing a bit of a trail right now in this era, and really hoping that this model can be really replicated in other regions. So I'll pause there.
Cool. Thanks, H, for telling us a little bit and getting me excited to hear more. Renee, do you want to talk a little bit about yourself and your work?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. Really happy to be here and share a little bit about this today. My name is Renee McEwen, and I lead sustainability and CSR for Sodexo's corporate services segment. So for those of you familiar with Sodexo, we, of course, do institutional catering in many different environments, hospitals, universities, K-12 schools, stadiums, etc. I work specifically in our corporate services segment. So H alluded to some of our tech clients. We'll talk about those a little bit later. But in my role for our segment, we have sort of our traditional business, and then we have what are new food models. So in 2017, Sodexo purchased a company out of the UK called Good Eating Company. And this is a company that was doing corporate catering, corporate dining a little bit differently. They really liked the ethos, and that's okay for pronouncing I have a weird last name. It's okay. McKeon, I answered it. But yeah, Good Eating Company just had a really different way of doing things. So it was purchased in 2017 in UK. It was brought over to the US really just recently, 2021, and basically absorbed something that existed already called Artisan Restaurant Collection. All that background just to say that there was an entity here in the US that was also blazing a trail and doing things differently. It really was created by a few rogue culinarians and food service operators out in the field who saw a need to create a different type of food service for a different type of client. So Artisan before, and now Good Eating Company, or GEC, as you may hear me refer to it, is really focused on sustainability, on community, on a premium dining experience. For many of these companies, the food is a huge part of their benefits package. It's part of their talent attraction and retention strategies. So it's a very competitive landscape, and companies out there like the, LinkedIn's and Google's and Facebook's take great pride in the food programs and the meals that they provide their employees. And they require a really different type of partner to work with on that kind of dining. So in my role, for the segment, I am focused on all things sustainability and CSR. And then for Good Eating Company, I lead the sustainability and CSR strategy as well. We did just hire somebody to support, which is phenomenal. And so, as Heather alluded to, for us, we are focused on piloting. And hopefully she said a word that I resonate with, and I hope to bring back to my team: permanence. I'm ready for this to graduate and to stop being a pilot and just be the way we do things. But about a year and a half ago, H and I started talking offline outside of a group that we were a part of, and just sort of brainstorming, how can we get this off the ground? How can we get regenerative product into the GEC supply chain? How can we support BIPOC farms in a meaningful way? And that's really where the pilot was born. And so I'll stop there with my intro, and we can get into the details in a bit.
Great. Thank you. And it's funny, Renee, that you mentioned the word permanence, because I bumped on that too. And I was thinking, like, what an amazing goal. Because I think oftentimes in institutional purchasing and in these relationships, a food hub or a value chain coordinator will work for so long developing a relationship with like one particular buyer. If that person, goes on parental leave or moves to a different city or whatever, then you're starting from scratch. So I'm definitely thinking about sustainability in the sense of that it's not always so reliant on this individual that might, have that extra gumption to do something that might be a little harder. But we can stick a pin in that because there's a lot of other stuff to talk about. But I also noticed. H, can you tell us a little bit about the pilot you're running with corporate buyers, how it works, and then maybe a little bit about how that relates to the framework?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, this is sort of a two-pronged pilot. It starts with a group of target farmers, again, in that same region I mentioned, the Salinas and Watsonville areas. These are small and organic growers growing on about 5 to 40 acres. Most of them tend to be around like the 10-acre size. And these are farmers that tended to be former contract pickers, usually berry pickers, and then went through a training program at ALBA. Some of you may be familiar with that. It's a land-based learning center where they learned to basically develop their own organic farming businesses. Many of them took that route because they were, kind of really suffering under the heavily pesticide-infused lifestyle of a grower and the lack of autonomy, and also became passionate about organic agriculture because of that background. So, but the market environment tends to be really, really unfriendly and challenging for this type of grower. There's really a limited amount of organic distributors in the region, and there's so much market volatility that regular consumers and even end buyers don't often see. So, like last year, for instance, the price of strawberries fell to as low as $4 per flat. And it's normally a good day, it should be about $18, $16 to $18 per flat. And that's not including, the charges that growers pay on cooler and cardboard, which can add up to $3. So essentially what we saw was tons of strawberries get disked under. We've seen the same thing happen with lettuce. We've seen the same thing happen among a whole bunch of other crops. So we're seeing farmers who are seeing 30 to 40% on-farm food loss, mostly due to market volatility. They don't have access to market information, real trends. They're a little bit isolated. And these are farmers that are interested in, basically performing ecosystem services. A lot of times they're inheriting beat up strawberry land that is salty, that is dry, that has been drenched with pesticides. And they're, spending 2 or 3 years on land that they're leasing. They don't even have full land security on. And they're restoring and healing the soils. And a lot of them are becoming increasingly interested in going even deeper and getting more into regenerative practices, and have already adopted, like a good handful that are from like the total list of, the regenerative menu. So enter buyers like GEC, who are really committed and want to support regenerative agriculture, have made pledges to support it, have set targets or are working on setting targets. And that kind of drove the impetus for putting together this pilot. So again, this group of target farmers, of which there are about 40 to 45 to choose from, we started with a group of 7 or 8. We put them into a small farmer-friendly aggregator in the region who has a cooler and access to trucks. Then that goes into Vesta Food Service, a regional distributor that is contracted to serve both Google and GEC. And then Vesta coordinates the flow of sending the availability list to those end user chefs at each of GEC's units. And then those chefs place orders each week on a pre-order, and then it comes through. So we've basically been able to do this kind of a weekly availability list flow. And after a year or so of sales, now Renee and I have put our heads together, and now we're moving into phase 2, where we're looking at collaborative crop planning. So how can we reduce food loss even more? How can we give the farmers even more security and keep improving their cash flow? These are farmers where if they get an extra $10,000 to $15,000 per year, that's the difference between breaking even and having a profitable year, or eating another loss and taking on more operational debt. Mm-hmm. So I am just like extraordinarily thrilled that not only do we have the commitment of GEC, but we've also been able to increase a little bit of more commitment from the Google side as well, so that farmers have even more volume to support and recruit more and more growers into the chain.
Heather, I'm going to go a little off script here and just ask, can you talk about your sort of personal incentive structure? Like, this sounds like it takes a lot of time, energy, effort from you to do that coordination work. How are you getting paid for that time?
Great question. So KTA kind of provides me with sort of like my base for how I get this covered. There have been some interest from not only buyers in Northern California, but also in other regions that are interested in this model, kind of exploring what a fee for service could look like for the future. So there's a lot of eyes kind of watching this pilot. But currently my KTA contract covers most of this because all the growers being impacted are currently KTA growers. But it's a good question to cross down the road as we kind of want to impact even more growers who may not be in the KTA ecosystem.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. Yeah. So Renee, I'm going to shift to you and ask a little bit about why a company like Sodexo would bother going the extra mile here. You mentioned, it sounds like these clients are very high value clients. So, you're an engineer at Google, you want to be eating really nice food to go with your, very high end job. But for the distribution company, for GEC and or Sodexo, are there other motivations besides just meeting that sort of top dollar client?
Yeah, you hit on a great point, and it kind of relates to what Susan just mentioned in the chat. It's very much about the client base. It's a partnership. So there are a lot of folks who tend to target food service companies, but it's all the steps in the chain, all the links in the chain, right? And I think that's why H does such a great job in her role. She's, really laser focused on all the players and all the layers involved. So for us, a really critical part of making this happen was finding a values aligned distributor who was part of our network. We both knew, we already worked with and were sourcing from in the region, who agreed to bring on this group of farms, who agreed to create a separate set of product codes for us so that we could track this. It really did take a little bit of, a little bit of work on the back end to make that happen. And it does take, the right partners. And then with respect to Susan's point and to your question, Ellie, it really is about a values aligned client as well. Whether they're doing it for ethical reasons or HR reasons, a lot of clients and a lot of different motivations, but there are, a subset of companies that are looking to provide an elevated experience, a just experience, a climate smart dining experience for their employees. It helps them meet their carbon goals and their own CSR and sustainability goals. So what I tend to focus on with our clients when we're talking about this is, what's that crossover between your goals and our goals as companies, your carbon targets and ours, your DE&I goals and ours, because everything that we do really kind of trickles up into their reporting and, becomes either they're a benefit to them or a burden to them, right? So it really is about being in lockstep with your clients. And so that, that absolutely is critical to making it happen. And that's why for Sodexo, Good Eating Company was the perfect place to start with this. Obviously my hope is that this is something that, ripples outward and impacts the rest of the company and inspires others to do things a little bit differently. Maybe there won't be a 15% commitment for sourcing across the board, but if we can introduce folks to this idea of, this kind of model, this kind of sourcing, and inspire a little bit of change, I'll feel like that was a positive impact overall.
Yeah, thank you. That you kind of started to head to where I was going next, which is, not everybody on this call is working in Northern California and has that, kind of buyer in their backyard necessarily. So I'm wondering how you feel like this pilot or your work is maybe influencing Sodexo more nationally. Is there, an impact that this could have outside of the Northern California environment?
Yeah, absolutely. So Good Eating Company is newish and small. We're primarily concentrated in California, NorCal, Southern California. We've got a few sites in the Pacific Northwest, a few in Colorado, and a few on the East Coast. And so we're rapidly growing. We have found that even before COVID, the brand, the ethos, the way we do things was becoming more attractive in the market. We were seeing a lot of interest and growth. And post-COVID, of course, that's only accelerated. So we anticipate the company, fingers crossed, going through hyper growth, but realistically, I think we're going to continue to scale quickly. And I've already got my eye on what's next after this very regional pilot here in Northern California. And so for us, the next logical step is, the places where I mentioned, we've got some concentration of operations. So that looks like, Pacific Northwest, Southern California, a little bit in Atlanta, Colorado, New York. Our new team member, I'll be able to focus on letting, this pilot, and I don't know when we graduate to this program, to continue to run while we look and have our eyes on other parts of the country. To your point, you mentioned, geography, right? A lot of these companies are based in large coastal cities. These are a lot of times HQs, but we have seen a trend where a lot of our clientele is moving, like so many, inward and inland and to the Midwest and to places that were formerly considered, second, third tier cities. So the Omahas, the Indianapolises. So my hope is that trend that is sort of happening in corporate real estate for all kinds of different reasons actually benefits and really sort of diffuses that web and takes the concentration out of those large cities and moves it inward and across the country, because the impact can grow and can creep across that way, I think.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's exciting. I feel, we serve a pretty national audience, and there's always great things coming out of Northern California. And sometimes if you're living somewhere else, it's like, okay, well, that's great for you people, but it doesn't mean anything to me in, Nebraska, Texas, Michigan, wherever else. So it's exciting to hear that you're seeing this, as potentially spreading out. I also just wanted to lift up Susan's comment in the chat, because I think it's a great point. So Susan says, if you can't find the fit for the entire system with food service, look for client points that might fit. Examples in Pennsylvania, where the entire school food service couldn't make work for the economics, but the sports teams are looking for good eating experiences and can leverage extra funds needed for that. So getting your foot in the door, Susan, I think is a great idea. I know of some folks in Northwest Arkansas that started supplying the little grab and go cafe at a hospital when they were having trouble getting into the actual cafeteria of the hospital, but figured out how to sell into a smaller component, and that kind of helped crack that door open so that they could start supplying the actual food service, cafeteria.
Yeah, really great point, Susan.
Great. So the next question is kind of going back and retreading, but H, I'd like to hear your take on this as well. In terms of just California is obviously unique in terms of just the supply and the demand. So what are some components of what you've been trying out that maybe you're in the pilot that folks in other geographies could learn from?
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of like, especially when thinking about like, well, it's really any buyer, but particularly for food service, kind of in regardless of region, you really have to scan for viability. And I was just having a great conversation with Elliot Smith, who I know many of you know, yesterday. And we were talking about, especially in a complex environment with so many different people in the ecosystem, like on the GE side, there's Renee at the corporate level, there's the area chefs, there's the unit chefs, there's the unit leadership. There's just so many people in the system. At Google, like you've got the Google food team, you have the Bon Appetit management company leadership, and again, like the operators and line units and just like all the different org charts. What you really have to scan for is how much pre-work is the buyer willing to do. And so the three axes I think about are knowledge, capability, and policy. For knowledge, how much does the buyer, especially your main points of contact, how much do they know about the local food system? Can they name a local farm? How much do they know about their own supply chain? How much do they know about how much their distributor knows about the local supply chain and the local food system? For capability, how flexible or inflexible are their procurement processes and methodologies? Are they willing to relax some requirements? Are they willing to wag the dog a little bit and get their distributor to do some of that relaxation or add in a new system the way that Vesta has been able to do that? Is the distributor willing to like flex with you a little bit on their margin or on their logistics? So that's kind of like how you scan for capability, and there's a ton of other things too. And then for policy, that can be anything for have they signed on to GFPP? Have they signed an internal regenerative agriculture pledge? Have they signed a minority and women-owned business pledge? Whatever policy it is, you leverage it and make sure that that's how you can get in. So making sure that you have a full assessment or as best you can of what the buyer is showing you in all three of those areas, that will tell you how viable this is. What you don't want to do is take a group of BIPOC farmers or other socially or economically disadvantaged farmers into something that's and setting them up for failure. That just burns bridges for everybody else in your region. So being really careful. And then on the Just BIPOC sourcing site that Ellie dropped in the chat, there is a self-assessment questionnaire for food service buyers to take to assess themselves, to start thinking about the types of questions about the mechanics of a system and how it can work. So again, getting them thinking about their own pre-work. How do they think about menuing? Are they only looking to one-to-one substitute, your special kale for their conventional kale, or are they going to menu around the items that you have? If you say, hey, we're going to have a bunch of rainbow radishes, are you going to menu around that? That's a really good, conversation starter to, again, understand the capabilities part of it. Do they know what their insurance requirements are? Are they willing to take a look at that? So again, just kind of getting them asking the questions. So for me, that's kind of like a really good framework to take to any region to understand if it is indeed a match or a potential match. And it's okay if all the homework hasn't been done, but getting them thinking about it and engaging with you on it, for me, is crucial.
Yeah, that framework is super valuable, Heather. And I'm wondering, what you said that there's a way for a buyer to fill that questionnaire.
Yeah.
If you aren't that buyer, if you're working in a food hub in some other part of the supply chain, can you get that information? Where might you get it? Or how much?
Yeah, so on the Just BIPOC sourcing website, I wish it was slightly more navigable. This was a website done by another entity, but but I supply the content for it. But if you dig around, you can find the self-evaluation questionnaire, and you can just kind of take it and see how that goes. And it kicks out little kind of action cards based on how you respond. So you can put yourself in the mode of being a theoretical buyer, or just downloading the questions and seeing what kinds of things should I be preparing for in a conversation with the buyer that I'm having. And then if there's any other additional needs around that or thought partnership, please do contact me, and I'm happy to talk through even more learnings that I've had since that website came out.
Awesome.
Thank you, Renee. That's the link.
Oh yeah, good job, Renee. Good internet sleuthing. So the question I have, and folks in the audience will have some time to dig into your questions, so put them in the chat or keep them in your brain and I'll call on you in a minute, is it feels to me, you were talking about the types of farmers getting in this program. And I'm thinking about, a small BIPOC farmer who maybe is leasing land. In terms of the power dynamic of comparing that person to Google, which is maybe the most powerful entity in the world right now, that is a huge gap in power. And I'm just wondering from your position, and Renee, I'd be interested to hear your take on this as well. How do you try and balance that out a little bit, or how do you try and, help those farmers build their own power? Like, what is navigating that dynamic feel like?
Great question. I'm going to answer it as diplomatically as possible. So I think this is like one of the primary, like, powerful roles that a value chain strategist, facilitator, coordinator can play, is essentially being a bullshit field, right? There's so many things that people who have been in corporate food service for their whole life and are more farm removed. And this isn't just about Google. This is about many other conversations I've had. GEC is a gem, and it's been amazing to work with, but I've definitely had interesting conversations with many other types of corporate and institutional buyers where they just haven't been on a farm in a while. They're farm removed. They don't understand that small farmers don't operate the way that corporate brokers do. They don't understand that production shifts from the Salinas Valley to the Central Valley down to Yuma in Mexico. They don't understand the complexities of the market dynamics, and they certainly don't understand the daily lives and struggles of a small farmer, regardless of geography.
Mm-hmm.
So having really honest but diplomatic conversations with people who are in corporate, food service leadership, and gently yet firmly explaining that, things can't happen. I can't deliver. Like, sometimes there's just going to be shorts. This person is growing on 8 acres, and I'm sorry that they were short 3 cases of green beans. And this is like part of your commitment. So reminding them of their commitment, reminding them of the realities of regional, small scale agriculture, and continuing to demonstrate credibility by working with other buyers, showing your successes. I find that, credibility and having a lot of different products going on tends to help even with giant companies that have a lot of power in the world and in the region. So not a super straightforward answer, but it is something that comes up for me quite a bit.
Yeah, thank you. It seems like those public commitments can be really powerful. And we get really used to hearing by 50% by 2025, 30% by whatever. And then like that date comes and goes, and you don't ever really see the big announcement that like, hey, we did it. But I love the idea of, trying to really hold folks to those commitments. Thoughts on sort of navigating that power imbalance?
Was that for me?
Oh yeah. Sorry,
yeah, cutting out a little bit. Sorry.
Garbage. I'm really sorry.
No, that's okay. Internet problems. Yeah. Hold our feet to the fire, please. I just delivered a presentation to the GEC team last week. We did a 2-day offsite, and we're not as far as I'd like us to be, honestly. And so that means we have to pick up a lot of ground this year. And I showed a, tentative glide path to hitting 15% by 2025. And we've got our work cut out for us. And it's going to be challenging, right? This pilot here in Northern California is one location, and we have to replicate this in other geographies where we're present and actually make the purchasing happen. So yeah, to the point about meeting the commitment and holding our feet to the fire. To the other question, which is, much more difficult, likewise, I'll try to answer it diplomatically. I love working with Good Eating Company because most of my colleagues get it. They are on the same page. They are fully supportive of this, but we're still not perfect. I mean, to Heather's point, we may be a gem, but it's a diamond with some imperfections, if you will. So I do still find myself explaining to my team, I have a nonprofit background. I worked in the nonprofit space for 13 years before I came to Sodexo. This was my first private sector job in almost 15 years. So I do find myself having to sort of paint the picture for my colleagues of, how does a nonprofit work? What does a real, meaningful, mutually beneficial partnership look like? Power balance. To your point, Heather had a really great call out in the blog post, which I think I saw somebody post up in the chat a little while ago about, even with all the right intentions in the world, you can start an initiative that falls apart and does a disservice to the producer. And I forwarded that excerpt to my team and said, hey, look at this. I really want us to be mindful of this power differential, about what relationships with small, under-resourced, underrepresented groups mean, and the role we play and the commitments we have. It is still a challenge, but I think that we're on the right track and we're doing things, the best that we can, and being held accountable by partners and by our clients is what we need.
Well, thanks, Renee, and thanks for infiltrating. I think having that nonprofit background and sort of understanding the mental models that are different from a nonprofit world to a corporate world is probably really powerful in your position.
I was gonna say it's helpful, I think, too, like that Renee is like, has a nonprofit background and is now in corporate life, and then I have a mix of nonprofit, local government, and then I had my 6-year corporate startup era where I was a sourcing leader and director at Blue Apron and Imperfect Foods. So it's like we are able to code switch in a way that I think is really helpful and makes for a really good working relationship. And then that, it also helps, again, with talking to tech companies, having been inside a tech company and seen inside the belly of the beast, helps me understand, and communicate with them in a way that I think surprises them, because I think there's sometimes assumptions that are made that I might just be coming from like a dinky little farming nonprofit, and that I haven't seen, what really goes on inside a tech company or in the meeting room. So I just wanted to add that piece there too.
Yeah. And I think, as somebody mentioned earlier, like those relationships that you build with one person sometimes are a blessing and a curse, because when they leave, you are starting over or it just fizzles out. And I think that's really important, is trying to infuse this into the values and the operating model of the entire company, so that it's not just, Renee's passion project or our chef's vision. This needs to survive and thrive beyond us when we're gone, if we move on. So I think, that's really important to me, is making sure that we had a public commitment made, that our entire team understands what this means, and hopefully that they'll embrace it and carry it forward without me having to constantly be there driving it.
Right. Laura, I'm seeing your comment about how buyers are personally incentivized, and I'm wondering if you might unmute and talk a little bit more about that idea, because I think it makes a lot of sense, but I'd love to hear some more details if you don't mind.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, more from my years at Red Tomato than my time at the center, where I'm working more on the demand side than the supply side. But I found that over time, as you're investing in building relationships with your buyers, understanding like what risk they're taking on, both in their position or in terms of meeting their business goals by working with a new supplier, really helps like build the trust and create deals that have the potential to really be mutually beneficial, the way Renee was describing. So knowing this buyer is like got to be at 100% fulfillment all the time, otherwise their butt's on the line, is really valuable information when you're working with a crop that might be really fragile, and it might be like, okay, this is not a good fit. Like, let's talk about hardware and not strawberries. Or, if it's really margin, then okay, let's find products where we can get to a deal that works for my growers and works for the metrics that this buyer's aiming. And it's not information, like they play that close to the vest, and that's why the relationship building over time is so important. But just really understanding like their paycheck depends a lot on the choices they make in terms of sourcing. And, we're always asking people to take a risk when they're switching from tried and true. It doesn't mean it's the wrong choice. Like it's our job to figure out how to make that work and mitigate the risk on both ends of the transaction. But I found that to be like a really useful way to approach the deal making, with a little bit of compassion for the buyers they hold a ton of power, and they're often between a rock and a hard place, just like the growers we're advocating for are.
Yeah. Incredible point. Absolutely.
Thanks, Laura. And yeah, it's interesting to hear kind of the resonance across what Renee and H were saying, and Laura's point too, around understanding different people's incentives, different people's language, the code switching, it takes, you know, a pretty deep understanding of multiple different people's positions to be able to get to yes. Because my internet is struggling, any other questions from other folks in the audience or things anyone else wants to share or ask of our presenters today? I see Patrice's comment here about corporations needing to invest in goals and then tracking the progress and then be able to sort of address some of those challenges. Patrice, do you want to say a little more about what you mean?
Yeah, hi everybody. I was just listening to some of what Renee was speaking about when she was talking about specifically her when she goes to the table to her coworkers, she has to kind of make the case that this is where it's at, right? You know, like it's actually trying to move the needle to make it make sense. So that we want an equitably sourced environment. And I think that's something that the Eastern Market is working towards right now. And I hear that resonate across the nation. Like we want to try to make the farming and the ability to source what farmers are growing more equitable, because we see all of the details in the data. However, it's a lot of challenges in that. And when you're like Sodexo trying to invest in that opportunity, is going to be some growing pains, and we have to be ready for that on both ends. I do want to say that I would love to connect further with Heather and maybe Laura Edwards to talk further about some of the things we're doing in Detroit. We have a lot of different BIPOC co-ops popping up. We're trying to make sure that we can equitably get their food into the food system. And I'm willing to sit down with companies like Sodexo. And we have several companies here like USA Foods and others that source to schools. We would love to be able to talk further about what we could do here to better improve our efforts as well. So I appreciate the space and time. This is a really good connection. So thank you guys for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Patrice. You know, one of the things I was hearing from you is just that these things take a lot of time. And we, you know, in our culture, in business, aren't always really used to that and aren't always great at being patient and sort of starting small and growing. And so, you know, I really appreciate Renee and H talking to us about some of the sort of starting small and getting your foot in the door work that it takes. And I'm also offering, you know, a chance for you all to drop your email addresses in the chat so that Patrice can reach out to you. And also another comment from Laura in the chat about losing a deal to a broker because because a broker took the buyer to the Caribbean for a weekend. Can't really compete with that all the time on a nonprofit or small food hub budget.
Yeah, I'll tell my next LFPP grant, I'll just sure to put in a budget for a Caribbean library.
I'll co-sign on that one. 100%.
Fancy vacations. Just like USDA, don't ask too many questions.
This is Susan. I just have another question, and I'm a pretty far out thinker, so maybe this is kind of like way out in left field, but I follow the national and the international produce news a lot. And, you know, we've all seen this summer especially, but we've seen it, you know, in the past, and we will continue to see it more so, the changes that are small, whether any size producers are facing due to the environmental changes. Along with that, we're seeing, you know, through COVID, we saw the supply chain and logistics changes, which are obstacles which are continuing to exist. You know, we got to this global food environment because, well, somebody needs to supply, say, strawberries, you know, because since we talked about strawberries today, and you can't get them here because they didn't grow here, they don't grow in season, so we can get them somewhere else. But now, you know, folks are working towards extension technologies, and technology can be a positive and a minus thing, but you have all these other obstacles to being able to get what you need, when you need, for who you need it. And now we have this explosive investment and growth in environmentally controlled farms, which, speaking to your point, Renee, you know, expanding to areas that may not be coastal cities, you're seeing a lot of that environmentally controlled farms developing in those non-coastal cities. And because of economics, they are generally starting with something that we could possibly learn, where, you know, they have a contract with you know, like they have a contract with Giant Eagle, or, you know, Whole Foods or somebody. And they start by growing for that. But as they get increasingly competitive, they're going to have more product available. And then you have them at all different ends, because you have the mega ones and the mega companies, and then you have these very, very small ones that a lot of times are focusing on, you know, 2 or 3 products, or they're focusing on microgreens, and they might be, you know, they might be one guy in an environment the size of a garage, a 1-car garage. And I'm just kind of wondering, you know, how this is going to impact all of this work that we are doing. So possibilities to leverage technology, but also giving us a lot of obstacles and barriers.
I may have missed something, Susan. So is it technology on the production side, or like the distribution and kind of like sales facilitation side, or both?
I would say both. I mean,
Uh-huh.
yeah, it's going to be all through the system.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I've been having some like increasing conversations about software solutions, particularly to enable like value chain facilitation. You know, there's a couple more, like several years ago, there was one wave where we kind of all saw, you know, like sorcery and things like that try to come out, attempting to create a pre-sales environment in order to have coordinated crop planning. Basically, the thing that Renee and I and her team are going to be doing a little bit more manually. What concerns me on the distribution and aggregation side is like that there's so much lock-in already for existing distributors. You know, like we see this all the time, like even with Vesta, who has been doing a fantastic job collaborating with, you know, with KTA and GEC. Right now, they have only 2 fields available in their product code, like description for an individual product, excuse me. So we can't say it's organic, BIPOC, and regenerative. We have to choose 2. So like that really messes up kind of tracking for everybody. And like that's it's something like so trivial, but it's like once things get locked in, and we've all seen examples of how certain distributor-oriented software doesn't have source identification all the way through the chain. And that's really, really hard to undo. So now that we kind of are starting to see these new solutions trickle in, they don't quite have like the full workhorse functionality of like a lot of the ERPs the distributors like to use, but they are kind of getting at that. How can we get this to this pre-sale environment where we can do some more crop planning? How can we ensure source ID happens through the chain? So I think we're just in a really weird time of transition. And I think it's also helpful to remember that even though we are in a technologically advanced era, value chain facilitation is very, very new. Like this is we're in its birth right now. So like there's always gonna, especially in my conversations with tech companies, there's always the instinct to be like, how can we make us a tool? How can we like fix this with software? How can we do this? It's like we don't really have the social infrastructure ready in order to put, you know, a software infrastructure solution in place. So I always encourage people to slow down on trying to immediately put a tech fix when we still have to figure out the manual process before we slap software on top of it. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. I tend to get skeptical of those, you know, tech solutions, because we all know that the flexibility that's needed, the understanding across different people's sort of sets of values that's needed are just really hard to replicate with, you know, a bunch of like quick Excel different formulas. So thanks for that, because I definitely agree. I know that we could keep this conversation going. I'm mindful of time, and we have a couple little announcements that Wallace wants to make. So just any last comments from Heather and Renee, anything else that you all want to share or promote or ask for help with?
Please reach out anytime. I am currently starting to have some initial conversations, as I mentioned, with kind of scaling the model to other buyers and in the Midwest. Elliot Smith and I have talked about maybe teaming up on some sort of capacity building, deep three to 4 week training for corporate and institutional buyers, where we would partner with local food systems organizations in order to make sure that it was in partnership and in collaboration and deepening the work that's already going on in regions. So I would love to get any thought partnership from the community on that. And yeah, thank you so much for letting me blab today. And this is a ton of fun.
Likewise, I'll just say thanks for having me. I think this model and initiative shows a lot of potential, and super excited about keeping you all up to date on where we go next. So yeah, thank you. I value the work you're doing. I appreciate the opportunity to share it with you.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, many thanks to both of you. I learned a ton, and I always love to see pilots like this that feel like really pushing the envelope of what's possible. But then I also really appreciate both of you offering some of those practical tools for people that are, have different assets in their communities than a giant buyer like Google. So thanks to both of you. And before people jump to FSLN Food Systems Leadership Network things that I wanted to promote. First off, we're doing our first ever Mem Survey. We obviously work really hard to try and provide services and tools to you all that are really valuable and relevant, but sometimes we're shooting in the dark. So we created this survey both to hear what we've been offering that's valuable to you, and also to get some input and some ideas about what we can continue designing and offering to really support all of you. So Erin just put the link to the member survey in the chat. And we would really, really appreciate your input. We're only as good as you all think we are, so we need your help. The second thing is next week we're having a call on food banking 101. We know that a lot of folks have started creating partnerships, working with different types of food access, anti-hunger efforts in their communities. And we were talking today about mental models, and it feels like there are just some translation issues between the local food systems folks and the food bank food access folks. So the goal of this call next week is to kind of break down some of those barriers. It's September 27th at 2 p.m. Eastern, which is 11 Pacific. And Erin also put the link to register for that next week as well. And I think that's it for us. So big round of applause for HM Renee. Thank you both so much. And we will share the recording and probably some goodies from the chat, including those links there and just shared, and the link to the framework so you all can dig into those resources as well. And take care, everybody, and we'll see you for the next October.